At my own wedding, in front of more than 200 guests, my future in-laws pointed at my mother and said, "That's not a mother. That's a mistaken address." People laughed. My bride laughed. I stood up, stopped the ceremony before the cake was cut, and walked out holding my mother's hand. Everyone thought that was the end. They were wrong. By the next morning, decisions made quietly months earlier began to surface, and the family that mocked her learned what happens when you underestimate the man she raised. Before I tell you everything, do me a small favor. Tap subscribe, et me know you're here by dropping a quick hello in the comments or telling me where you're watching from. It helps this story reach people who might need it, and it reminds me I'm not standing alone while telling it. Now let me take you back to how that night really unfolded. Silverfall Manor was built to impress from a distance. White columns stretched upward like they were daring the ceiling to challenge them. Twin staircases curled along the walls, polished to the point of being slippery, more suited for cameras than people. Crystal chandeliers poured warm light over marble floors, but the warmth never quite reached the air. Outside, the garden was arranged for photographs rather than comfort, white roses, identical centerpieces, chairs aligned with mathematical precision. A string quartet played softly, and no one really listened. A documentary crew moved quietly between tables, cameras gliding, catching every rehearsed smile. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a production. I sat at the head table in a tux tailored so precisely it felt like armor. I drank water instead of champagne, keeping my head clear, because something in my chest had been tight since the moment I arrived. It didn't feel like my wedding. It felt like I'd been cast to play the groom in someone else's legacy film. To my right sat my mother, Elena Calder. She'd altered her own dress the night before, carefully taking in the waist, smoothing the hem, making sure every stitch lay flat. The color was soft and modest, chosen not to draw attention, yet she somehow still stood out. Her hair was pulled into a low bun, neat and simple, the kind of style you learn after decades of doing the same thing for others. Her hands rested calmly on the tablecloth, fingers folded, knuckles marked with small calluses and faint scars from years of work no one in that room would ever respect. I glanced down at the wedding program, thick as a magazine. The Moore family pages came first, of course. Edmund Moore, chairman of Moorline Holdings, listed alongside boards, foundations, and civic awards. Helena Moore, philanthropist, keynote speaker, founder of initiatives with polished names and perfect branding. Their ancestors stared from black and white portraits on the walls, framed like monuments. Then came my page. Rowan Calder. Founder of Urban Thread. Raised in a working-class district. Proof that determination can rise from anywhere. It read clean. Impressive. Empty. At the bottom was my mother's line. Elena. Local stylist. Community spirit. No last name. No history. No mention of 30 years of rent paid on time, of 3 jobs juggled without complaint, of nights she stood until her feet swelled so I could sit at a table and dream. Just a phrase. A label. Something decorative. That was when it clicked. They didn't want her story. They wanted her reduced. Just enough grit to make my success look noble. Not enough detail to make her human. Behind us, voices drifted low. She was never formally trained, right? Learned it herself. Our gardener plays piano by ear too. My mother continued eating her salad in small bites, wearing that thin smile I knew well, the one that said, "It's fine, we'll survive this too." Edmund Moore stood and lifted his glass. The room straightened instantly. His presence didn't command respect so much as remind people what he controlled. "Tonight isn't just about 2 people," he said. "It's about a story of success unfolding in real time." He told my life like he owned it. From a strip mall salon in Brimley Falls to Urban Thread, all the way to Silverfall Manor. In his version, the lesson wasn't sacrifice. It was that a system like his could take someone like me and polish them into something worthy of this room. I watched my mother swallow hard. Then Helena Moore took the microphone. Her voice was smooth, gentle, practiced. "Rowan proves talent doesn't depend on where you're born," she said. "Some are fortunate, some aren't. But with perseverance, you can rise." She smiled at me, then let her gaze slide toward my mother. And of course, much of that gift comes from his mother. Those golden hands. That connection to ordinary people. That kind of ability doesn't come from diplomas. It's just innate. Soft laughter followed. The kind that pretends to be kind while pressing someone lower without ever touching them. My mother set her fork down carefully and smoothed her napkin. That was her signal. Don't react. Don't give them the satisfaction. Something tightened in my chest so sharply I had to stand. I stepped into the side hall, away from the music and the lights. A cameraman looked up at me. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I stared into the lens for a second too long and didn't answer. When I turned back toward the ballroom, I heard Helena's voice before I saw her. She stood with Serafina Moore, my bride, and another guest, champagne glass balanced easily in her hand. "The bride looks flawless," Helena said. "Pure more elegance." Then she laughed lightly. "The groom's mother though, honestly, I thought she was someone's plus one. That's not a mother. That's a mistaken address." The laughter that followed was soft and sharp all at once. Serafina laughed too. "Oh Mom," she said lightly. "Careful. Someone might actually get offended." That was it. That was the moment something inside me shut cleanly and completely. I walked back to the table and leaned toward my mother. "We're leaving," I said quietly. Her hand closed around my wrist. "Rowan, no. It's just one night. I can take it." Serafina hurried over, her voice low and urgent. "You're overreacting. That's just how my family jokes. Don't ruin today over a comment." I looked around the room. The cameras repositioning. The guests waiting for the next scene. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to be agreeable. I walked to the microphone. The music faded. Conversation stilled. Glasses froze midair. "Thank you all for coming," I said evenly. "And thank you for making something very clear tonight." A few people chuckled, expecting a toast. "This wedding is over," I continued. "You can finish the drinks. The marriage stops here." Silence hit the room like a held breath. I set the microphone down, walked back, took my mother's hand, and led her out. As we reached the doors, I heard whispers rise behind us, confusion, disbelief, panic. By the time we stepped into the night, Silverfall Manor already felt like something I'd shed. They thought I had destroyed my future over a sentence. They didn't know that by morning, everything they valued was about to be questioned, and nothing would ever feel as secure again. The night air felt cooler than it should have as we stepped away from Silverfall Manor. The valet froze when he saw us approach without smiles, without the slow ceremonial pace of newlyweds. I took the keys from his hand myself. My mother said nothing as we drove, streetlights sliding across the windshield like passing thoughts neither of us was ready to say out loud. Only when the manor disappeared behind a curve of trees did she finally speak. "You didn't have to do that," Elena said softly, staring straight ahead. "I've lived through worse." "That's exactly why I did," I replied. "We didn't go home. Home didn't exist anymore, not in the shape people expected. I drove until the city thinned and the glow of Ashford's skyline dulled, until a familiar red and gold neon sign buzzed into view like a half-forgotten memory trying to stay alive. Copper Finch Diner had been open 24 hours a day for as long as I could remember. The sign flickered on the left side, always threatening to go dark but never quite doing it. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee, sugar, and fryer oil wrapped around us the second we pushed the door open. The waitress looked up, recognition flashing across her face before she smoothed it away. We slid into the same booth we always used, vinyl patched with duct tape, table scarred with decades of elbows and spilled drinks. I ordered black coffee. My mother ordered tea with lemon. Sitting there in a tux while the rest of Ashford slept felt unreal, like the night had folded time backward. The humiliation from the wedding still hummed under my skin, but beneath it was something steadier, older. Memory. I was 16 again, doing homework on the floor of a cramped apartment above a dying strip mall in Brimley Falls. Winter air slipping through cracked window frames no matter how many towels we shoved along the sill. My mother boiling water on the stove because the heater had been broken for weeks. She joked that it was a spa treatment while she wrapped my hands around a chipped mug so they wouldn't sting. She worked mornings at the salon, evenings doing house calls, weekends styling hair for weddings in banquet halls that smelled like carpet cleaner and desperation. I once found her asleep standing up in the supply closet, a comb still tucked behind her ear. She woke before I could say anything, checked her watch, and went straight back to work. At school, kids used to say I smelled like hair dye. One day a boy yelled, "Salon kid," down the hallway loud enough for everyone to hear. I went home furious, embarrassed, ashamed of something I shouldn't have been ashamed of at all. I told my mother I hated doing homework between hair dryers, hated smelling like chemicals. She didn't apologize. She wiped her hands on her apron, sat down across from me, and said, "If they smell hair dye, it means I still have a job. Never be embarrassed by honest work. Be embarrassed if you lie. Be embarrassed if you hurt someone. Not this." That was the first time I realized shame could be handed to you, and refused. Across from me now, she stirred her tea slowly. "You know," she said, "you could still call it a misunderstanding. People forgive a man who panics at his wedding. Especially a successful one." "I didn't panic," I said. "I chose." She sighed, not agreeing, not arguing. She never pushed when she knew my mind was set. My phone buzzed on the table. Julian Cross. I didn't open the message immediately. I already knew what it would say because I'd been waiting for it. Months of quiet preparation had been moving toward a moment like this, long before anyone picked flowers or booked a quartet. When I finally unlocked the screen, the subject line confirmed it. All transfers finalized. Documentation complete. Ready for presentation. I looked at my mother, still wearing the dress someone had mocked, still sitting upright like she belonged everywhere, whether others agreed or not. "Tomorrow," I said quietly, "you won't ever have to lower your head for anyone again." She frowned slightly. "Rowan, what are you talking about?" "Not tonight," I said. "Just trust me." She studied my face, then nodded. She had trusted me before when trusting me made no sense. By the time I dropped her off at home, the sky was already lightening. I didn't sleep. I showered, changed into the same suit I'd worn to the wedding, tied the same tie, and drove straight toward Moorline Spire. Morning traffic flowed like nothing extraordinary had happened. People drank coffee. People checked emails. The city didn't care about a cancelled wedding. But Moorline Spire did. The tower rose out of downtown Ashford like a blade of glass, reflective panels catching the gray sky. I walked through the lobby as security glanced up, recognition flickering in their eyes. Overnight, the wedding footage had leaked, just enough to stir curiosity. I could feel it in the way people looked at me now, waiting to see if I'd fold. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt shorter than usual. When the doors opened, Edmund Moore's assistant stood rigid near the conference room. "They're all inside," she said quietly. "They asked for you." Inside, the room was full. Edmund at the head of the table, Helena beside him. Serafina stood near the window, arms crossed tightly. Board members filled the remaining seats. Lawyers lined the far wall. They were all waiting for the same thing. An apology. An explanation. A retreat. I set my folder down halfway along the table and pulled out a chair. "Before we start," I said calmly, "there's something that needs to be acknowledged." Edmund's jaw tightened. "The only thing I want acknowledged is the stunt you pulled last night." "This isn't about the wedding," I said. I opened the folder and laid out the documents, transfer confirmations, notarized records, updated shareholder registers. As of yesterday, I continued, entities under my control hold a controlling voting interest in Moorline Holdings. Silence. Then chairs scraped. Someone swore under their breath. One of the lawyers leaned forward, reading fast, color draining from his face. Edmund shot to his feet. "This is absurd. You can't just walk in here and claim." "I didn't claim anything," I said evenly. "I purchased shares at market value from willing sellers over several months. While you were polishing narratives, I was reading footnotes." Helena's composure cracked for the first time. "You're doing this because of last night. Because of Elena." "I did this because you were already using my work and my life as decoration," I said. "Last night just confirmed how comfortable you are stepping on people you think can't fight back." Serafina stepped forward, voice trembling. "You're trying to hurt us." "I'm stopping you," I replied. One board member whispered, "He's not bluffing." I raised my voice just enough to cut through the noise. Effective immediately, Edmund Moore is suspended pending independent review. Helena Moore's authority to approve contracts is revoked. An external audit begins this week. All questionable partnerships are frozen. "You don't have the right," Edmund snapped. "I have the votes," I said. The room fell apart into overlapping arguments, legal jargon, accusations. And beneath it all sat one simple truth: control had changed hands. As I gathered my papers and stood, cameras were already forming outside the elevators. Reporters shouted questions about betrayal, power shifts, family drama. I didn't stop. Inside the elevator, watching the numbers tick downward, I felt no triumph. Just resolve. They thought the humiliation ended at the wedding. They were wrong. It was only the moment everything they'd ignored finally caught up to them, and the consequences were just beginning. By the time I reached the parking garage beneath Moorline Spire, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Messages stacked on top of one another, unknown numbers, old contacts suddenly revived, people who had never cared about my voice now desperate to hear it. I ignored them all. I sat in the car for a full minute with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly, letting the reality settle. Control hadn't changed because of one dramatic moment. It had shifted because months ago, I stopped letting other people define my place. I drove straight to the office of Urban Thread. Iron Quay District always smelled like old brick and reinvention. Converted warehouses lined the street, their past lives still visible in the scars along the walls. Our space sat on the second floor of a building that had once stored machine parts. The elevator still rattled like it was deciding whether to cooperate. Inside, desks made from reclaimed doors sat on metal frames, cables neatly tied beneath them, coffee mugs everywhere. This place had never pretended to be polished. It worked, and that had always been enough. Noah Pike looked up from his screen when I walked in. He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't need to. The footage had already reached him. "You okay?" he asked instead. "I am," I said. "We need to talk." Within minutes, the core team gathered around the long table near the windows. Some were nervous, some energized, all aware that something fundamental had changed. I laid it out plainly. Moreline Holdings. Majority control. Audit coming. Public scrutiny inevitable. Silence followed. Finally, Noah exhaled. "You just stepped into a storm most people spend their lives avoiding." "I know," I said. "Which is why Urban Thread stays exactly where it is. We don't become a trophy. We don't get folded into a logo. No shortcuts." A few heads nodded. Relief crossed more than one face. "Good," Noah said. "Because that wasn't why we built this." I left the office before noon and drove north, out of the city, toward a quieter stretch of road that led to my mother's house. She lived in a modest place, small porch, uneven steps, garden boxes she'd built herself out of scrap wood. When I pulled into the driveway, she was already outside, trimming dead leaves with a pair of old shears. She looked up, surprised. "You didn't sleep?" "No," I said. "I needed to see you." She wiped her hands on a cloth and studied my face. "Something happened." I nodded. I took control of Moreline. The shears paused midair. "I didn't do it last night," I continued. "I did it because for a long time they've been using my work, my story, and people like you as props. That ends now." She sat down slowly on the porch steps. "Rowan, that's a powerful thing you're holding." "I know," I said. "And I won't use it lightly." She reached for my hand, squeezed once. "Just promise me one thing. Anything. Don't let them turn you into what they are." That promise settled heavier than any document I'd signed. The next week unfolded like a controlled burn. The external audit began immediately. Independent firms combed through Moorline's flagship projects, Harbor Line Renewal first among them. What they found matched what my quiet spreadsheets had already suggested. Money routed through shell contractors with no real presence. Budgets bloated without corresponding progress. Reports polished for public eyes, hollow underneath. Media outlets caught the scent and followed it greedily. Headlines stacked up. Analysts speculated. Commentators argued over whether I was a visionary reformer or a traitor who'd used proximity to stage a takeover. I didn't respond. I didn't correct them. Truth didn't need a press release. Inside Moorline Spire, the atmosphere shifted from shock to fear. Meetings were tense. Lawyers spoke more than executives. Longtime partners suddenly requested calls to clarify optics. I made one thing clear in every interaction: documentation first, explanation second. If work had been done, it would show. If it hadn't, no story would cover it. Serafina tried to reach me on the third day. I didn't answer. On the fifth day, she showed up at Urban Thread. She looked different without the curated confidence, without the family machine behind her. Just a woman standing in a converted warehouse, hands clasped too tightly. "I didn't know about everything," she said as soon as the door closed behind us. "Not all of it." "You knew enough," I replied. "You grew up in those rooms." She swallowed. "I thought if I stayed quiet, I could change things slowly." "You thought silence would protect you," I said. "It never does." She looked away. "My mother told me not to interfere. She said if I warned you, it would ruin everything. And you listened." I was scared, she admitted. If I stepped out of line, I'd lose everything I grew up with. I leaned against the table, feeling the old wood beneath my palms. I grew up with nothing but a woman who refused to let me bend my spine for comfort. That difference matters. Tears slipped down her face. "I loved you." "I know," I said. "But love that stays quiet when dignity is trampled isn't something I can build on." She nodded slowly, like she'd already known the answer. When she left, the office didn't erupt in whispers. People simply went back to work. Sometimes endings don't need an audience. The audit report landed a week later, thick and precise. Harbor Line Renewal wasn't an anomaly. It was a pattern. Funds drained into nothing. Projects sold to the city as revitalization while neighborhoods saw little more than temporary fences and glossy renderings. I signed the referral documents myself and sent them to the City Oversight Committee. That night, the full wedding footage leaked. The clip spread faster than any official report. There was Helena's voice, light and cruel. There was Serafina's laugh. There was me at the microphone, calm and final. The public reaction was immediate and unforgiving. People argued, but one thing became impossible to deny: what had been said, and who had laughed. By the following Monday, Moorline Holdings was removed from the city's preferred vendor list. Contracts were frozen pending review. Hearings were announced. Edmund Moore resigned, for personal reasons. Helena followed quietly. Some executives vanished on extended leave. Others cooperated quickly, eager to distance themselves. Through it all, I felt no triumph. Only a strange calm. Like standing after a long illness and realizing the pain you'd normalized was finally gone. A private equity firm requested a meeting. Their office overlooked the river, glass walls reflecting sunlight and confidence. The man across from me slid a folder forward. With the right stewardship, he said, Moreline can recover. We can contextualize the findings. Handle things internally. Keep the story clean. I closed the folder without opening it. If I do that, I said, I just replace one name on the door with another. The same people get crushed quietly. That's not stewardship. He frowned. You're letting emotion guide business. I'm letting clarity guide it, I replied. I walked out. Instead of consolidating power, I stepped back. An interim governance structure went into place, community representatives, city liaisons, transparent reporting. I retained control on paper to prevent another quiet hijack, but I refused the CEO title. Moreline didn't need another figurehead. It needed daylight. I returned to Ironquay District and poured my energy into something else. The E Project. Named with a single letter, because my mother would never allow more. Scholarships. Microgrants. Mentorship for kids from neighborhoods like Brimley Falls. Places where ambition was treated like a liability instead of a promise. We launched it quietly in a community center built on land Urban Thread had helped transform. No chandeliers. No cameras. Folding chairs. A mural painted by local students wrapped around the building in bold blues and oranges. My mother sat in the second row, hands folded in her lap, wearing a dress she'd bought on sale and altered herself the night before. When I spoke, I didn't mention Moreline or audits or headlines. I talked about homework on salon floors. About coupons cut at midnight. About a woman who carried groceries up 3 flights of stairs and still asked how your day was. Then the host did the one thing I'd asked them not to do and invited Elena up. She shook her head, embarrassed, but the room clapped until she stood. She took the microphone with both hands. I don't know about foundations, she said simply. I just know my son used to sit on the floor of my salon doing homework. If now some other kids get more space than that, every hour I stood on my feet was worth it. No applause could touch that truth. Later that night, I drove her back to Copper Finch Diner. Same booth. Same flickering sign. The waitress brought pie without asking and split it cleanly down the middle. You didn't have to go so far, my mother said quietly. If I'd stopped at the door of that manor, I replied, they'd still be telling their version of the story. I couldn't live with that. She nodded slowly, sipping her tea. For the first time, I noticed something small but profound. She wasn't scanning the room, waiting to be judged. She was just there. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end yet. It was only the point where silence finally lost its power, and the consequences were still unfolding. The weeks after the launch of the E project moved more quietly than the chaos that came before, but the silence wasn't empty. It was the kind that follows a storm, when everything looks the same on the surface but the ground underneath has shifted. I stayed in Lakehaven, back in Ironquay District, where Urban Thread had always lived. Moreline Spire continued without me. Interim leadership rotated through conference rooms that once treated certainty like a birthright. City hearings progressed. Audit summaries became public record. Commentators debated intent, scale, legacy. I stopped reading most of it. Once you pull truth into the open, you don't get to curate how people react to it. You just decide whether you're willing to live with daylight. One afternoon, Julian Cross called me into his office. The same cramped room. The same scarred conference table. He slid a thin folder across the surface. They're breaking it up, he said. Moreline? He nodded. Regulators pushed harder than expected. Properties are being sold off. Some to competitors, some to community trusts. There's pressure to redirect a portion of proceeds into local redevelopment funds. And, he paused, there's a matching commitment tied to your foundation. I leaned back slowly. Voluntary? As voluntary as anything gets when scrutiny is this bright. I didn't smile. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. Moreline wasn't a villain in a storybook. It was a machine built over decades by people who learned how to look respectable while extracting value quietly. Taking it apart didn't feel heroic. It felt necessary. A few days later, I got an email from an unfamiliar address. Short. Direct. Coffee? No agenda. Just clarity. It was from Lucas Moore. Edmund's younger son. The one who'd stood up in the boardroom and admitted he'd sent the documents. We met at a corner cafe that didn't bother with foam art or playlists. He looked tired. Older than his years. Like someone who had finally stopped lying to himself. I didn't do it to help you, he said after we sat down. I did it because I was done pretending I didn't understand the numbers. I never thought you did it for me, I replied. He nodded. The portfolio's being dismantled. It's messy. People are angry. Some deservedly. Some just scared. A few projects might actually end up better for it. That doesn't erase what was done, I said. No, he agreed. But it changes what happens next. We drank our coffee in silence for a moment. You could have walked away after the wedding, he said. Most people would have. Walking away would have left the story intact, I said. I wasn't willing to let that stand. He exhaled slowly. I wish I'd learned that earlier. We shook hands when we left. Not as allies. Not as enemies. Just two people who'd been standing on different sides of the same fire. That night, I drove my mother back to Copper Finch Diner. The neon sign still buzzed. The booth still had duct tape on the seat. The waitress still refilled mugs without asking. Time moved differently there. It always had. You know, Elena said, stirring her tea, you could have stopped after you walked out of that wedding. I know. You didn't have to carry it all. I wasn't carrying it, I said. I was putting it down. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I just wanted to be sure you weren't hurting yourself trying to protect me. I smiled faintly. You taught me how not to. For the first time, she didn't look around the diner like she was bracing for judgment. She just ate her pie. Slowly. Comfortably. Like someone who belonged exactly where she was. Months passed. Urban Thread expanded its pilot programs. Neighborhood councils used the platform to flag real needs, not staged renderings. Kids walked through spaces that had once been empty lots. Nothing flashy. Just usable. Honest. The EU project awarded its first scholarships quietly. No banners. No cameras. Just letters mailed to families who weren't used to receiving good news without conditions attached. One afternoon, while I was reviewing grant applications, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You probably don't want to hear from me. But I need to say this. It was Serafina. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Then I typed. Say it. She wrote back slowly, like someone choosing each word with care. I laughed because it was easier than standing up. I told myself it wasn't my place. That silence was safer. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, I could still be someone good later. I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness. I just didn't want the last version of me you remember to be the one who laughed. I read it twice. Then once more. I replied. I don't need apologies to move forward. I needed honesty to stay. I hope you learn to speak before comfort makes the choice for you. She didn't respond. And that was fine. One evening, I stood alone in the Urban Thread office long after everyone else had left. The warehouse windows reflected the city back at me, imperfect, alive, unfinished. I thought about the boy doing homework on salon tiles. About the woman who never let exhaustion harden her into bitterness. About a room full of wealthy people who thought words didn't matter if they were said softly enough. I thought about that sentence at the wedding. And I realized something simple. That moment didn't change who I was. It revealed who I'd always been when I stopped negotiating my own spine. If my story stayed with you, do me one last favor. Share where you're watching from or leave a single word in the comments so I know it reached you. And if you want more stories about quiet lines being crossed, and what happens when someone finally refuses to step back, consider staying with the channel. It means more than you think.